Let's get more now on today's warning from the Red Cross about the situation in Nepal, coming as the country's government predicts the cost of repairs to its infrastructure will exceed £1.3 billion. Live now to our central London studio, we can speak to Katie Peters, who's a research fellow at the Overseas Development Institute, which is the UK's leading independent think tank on international development. Very good morning to you. First of all, I want to get your view on the situation on the ground in Nepal now. A desperate plea from the Red Cross. They need more helicopters, more food, more water. Nearly a week on, logistically, what needs to happen now?
Well, it's a very difficult situation. I mean, we've seen certainly from pictures on the ground that it's a really challenging set of conditions to try and respond to. What's important, certainly for the international community, is to make sure that it's supporting national and locally led response initiatives. But unfortunately, it also reinforces the need for actually us to think more concretely about investing in reducing the impact of a disaster before a disaster strikes, because this is something that currently doesn't happen enough by the international community, and it should do.
So what should happen in your view?
Well, at the moment, rather ironically, the investments that we give to local organisations and the government of Nepal are actually as part of a response. What needs to happen is, instead of spending 5 times more money during the response, we need to think about helping people to prepare for a disaster and to reduce the impacts of a disaster.
Where's that money going to come from when no one knows what disaster could strike, where, how big an area it's going to affect, how many people? How do you prepare for something like that? Do you try and build buildings across a whole very poor country that can withstand an earthquake? How is that really possible?
It's definitely difficult, and it's particularly difficult for developing countries where the governments have to choose between a whole different set of developing pressures and needs. I think, though, certainly from the government of Nepal's perspective, they have been trying to prioritise, for example, where they retrofit buildings. So they've been prioritising hospitals and schools, and that's certainly the right thing to do. What's clear, though, is that there needs to be a lot wider coverage of where we retrofit infrastructure, and also a wider coverage of the types of local community activities that we can do to help people be more knowledgeable about what to do in the event of an earthquake.
I suppose one of the difficulties is that when you have pictures like this and you see the awful events unfolding and how it's devastated people's lives, ordinary people, the people of this country who've given millions in the DEC appeal, the governments around the world, they're far more willing to give aid, to rebuild, than it might be to get money out of them in the event of something like this happening.
Yeah, of course, and I think it's only human nature. You know, people want to respond, and that should continue. What I think is interesting, though, is that actually it was well known that there would be an earthquake at some point. Of course, we didn't know exactly when it was going to strike. But thinking about actually how we invest in risk reduction isn't just about potentially saving more financing on the response. It's about actually thinking about the longer term objective of somewhere like Nepal. At the moment, disasters set back development gains. So every time we have a disaster, all of the positive gains that have been made in trying to reduce poverty are actually completely undone. And that's why it's important, particularly for the international community, to think more about investing in risk reduction as part of their ongoing long-term development programs.
So what needs to happen now? This devastating earthquake has affected so many people, millions of people there. We're hearing that at least £1.3 billion is going to be needed to restore that infrastructure. Where's that money going to come from? Who's going to help with them as they have to spread it out across a very wide area? Who's going to actually help the government of Nepal deal with this?
Well, I think it's going to take a collective effort. The response that we've seen from the international community has been considerable, and it's very valuable and it's very needed. We need to actually think about what we're going to do with that response money. After the immediate search and rescue is complete, and it's clear that that's still ongoing, we'll move towards the reconstruction phase. And we need to do what we call build back better, which is making sure, for example, where we're rebuilding schools and hospitals and community centres, that they're done in a way that can actually withstand an earthquake of a similar magnitude in the future, so that hopefully we're not in this position again.
OK, Katie Peters, good to get your thoughts, research fellow at the Overseas Development Institute. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.